El doctor Mullis ganó en 1993 el Premio Nobel de Química por el descubrimiento de la reacción en cadena de la polimerasa.
Era poder hacer más copias de una secuencia específica, es decir, donde esa secuencia ya no estaba aislada, cuando estaba en medio de cientos de miles de otras cosas muy parecidas, ¿no? Entonces, para poder identificar esa secuencia única y hacer que se reprodujera, mientras que el resto pues desapareciera. Entonces nos permitía centrar nuestra atención en una secuencia única y convertir eso en algo lo suficientemente numeroso para poderlo utilizar, es decir, con suficientes copias. Eso es lo que se consiguió con PCR. Y también ha tenido otros muchos usos, digamos. Lo estoy utilizando actualmente para otra cosa totalmente diferente. Tiene que ver con la molécula misma y no la información ni la secuencia, sino más bien la forma. Esa es otra cosa, es otra aplicación. Estoy trabajando en curas de infecciones bacterianas y fúngicas, que es muy interesante porque nuestros antibióticos están empezando a no funcionar en ciertos casos contra ciertas bacterias. Hay gente que está muriendo de bacterias que a principios del siglo no hubiera significado su muerte. Había una cura, quizás sigue existiendo una cura, pero el caso es que con todos estos antibióticos empiezan ya a no funcionar, puesto que estos organismos contra los cuales están luchando se han convertido en organismos resistentes y no estamos fabricando o creando nuevos antibióticos con la rapidez necesaria para mantenernos en el mismo ritmo. Necesitamos de hecho un nuevo proceso que no se basa en envenenar el organismo, sino cómo hacer que nuestro sistema inmunológico haga frente a esta nueva invasión, aunque el sistema inmune no lo conoce, no lo sabe, pero estoy buscando el proceso que haga que el sistema inmune se le pueda decir, ataca aquello. Esto va a cambiar totalmente el uso de los antibióticos.
Exponentially, because the number of tests that was done went up exponentially. There's some of them that aren't that stupid, but there's a lot of them that are religiously associated with the notion. They believe in the notion that it is an infectious thing that will eventually sweep across the planet and kill everybody.
California microbiologist Dr. Kary Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993 for his development of one of the most widely used current techniques in molecular biology today, the PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. This revolutionary technique allows scientists to take a sample containing a very minute amount of DNA and replicate that DNA sequence until there are many copies. One of the first applications of PCR was to analyze human tissue for the presence of HIV. PCR is commonly used in medical and biological research labs for the detection of virus culture in infectious persons.
The people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of those. I was working on a test. The first time I really questioned it, I was working on a project where we were measuring HIV in people's blood at this place called Specialty Laboratories in Santa Monica. I was just a consultant there. I came in about 3 days a month, and we were working on that, and at some point we needed to re-up our grant from the NIH to work on that, and I had to write it. And so the first line of that was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I wrote that, and then I said, well, I need a paper, some kind of scientific paper, to reference that statement, because when you make a statement like that, that's like a fact. You need to say, here's how come I know that, right? You put a little 1 if it's the first statement you've made, and then you put down at the bottom of the paper you have a 1, and you say, here's a paper by somebody that describes why that statement is true, right? And so I said, I said, well, what's that? I don't know. Let me think about, what is that paper? Who do I go to for that? And I looked around, I asked a couple of virologists at that company, and they said, no, you don't have to reference. I said, I have to reference that because I don't know where that came from. How do I know that? And it turned out that nobody knew it. There wasn't a scientific reference, like a paper that somebody had submitted with like experimental data in it and like logical discussion and said, here's how come we know that HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. There was nothing out there like that. Nothing. The time I met Luc Montagnier, I had met a lot of AIDS researchers at meetings, and I had always gone up to them if they talked like they knew about HIV and AIDS. I always went up to them afterwards and I said, and I was getting really freaked about that. That's when I first started saying, they don't know. Nobody really knows. This whole thing is a big sham. It's ridiculous. But then finally Montagnier came to there was a special little seminar down in San Diego where an old friend of Robert Gallo's, Flossie Wong-Stahl, was opening up a Department of AIDS research down at San Diego. They had lots of money involved, federal money, and they had Montagnier come there and give a talk. And after that, they had a little wine and cheese thing, and I went over to Montagnier afterwards, and I said, Dr. Montagnier, I can't find a reference, I can't find a reference to go with the statement HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. I was right at the edge of my faith in the system, but I thought Montagnier will know why he thinks HIV causes it, and he'll tell me. He'll say, because of this study, but he didn't have that. None of those guys have that, and that's why they're so weird, That's why they don't want dissent. They don't want people like me walking up and asking them those kind of questions, and they're willing to go to great lengths to prevent that. They're out on a limb. I wouldn't want to be there with them.
I was given the mission to develop an HIV diagnostic test, and it was sort of an unspoken tradition at Amgen that whenever we would launch into a product development effort, that we'd invite persons from both sides of an issue. And the only person that I knew was not entirely convinced that HIV was an important target was Dr. Peter Duesberg. It was interesting at that seminar, the majority of the PhDs in the company actually boycotted the seminar. They had refused to come and be in the same room with Peter Duesberg. And I thought this was odd because as a scientist, we generally love vigorous arguments. And I thought that if persons had arguments against Peter Duesberg, that this would be a perfect time for them to attack him.
I remember when I made the shift myself, because for the first few years of AIDS, I was reporting on this story from the conventional perspective. And then I learned, from one reason or another, I had a chance to go into it more deeply. I spent a week in the lab of a virologist in Germany who showed me the procedures that were involved in isolating and purifying viruses, showed me why he also didn't believe that this had ever been done with HIV. And gradually I understood the intricacies of this story, and that allowed me to make the shift. But I remember being resistant to thinking that I'd been reporting this wrongly all those years. It takes a lot of kind of movement inside to be able to change direction on such an important and emotive issue as the cause of AIDS.
From the very beginning of my medical engagement, I focused on family planning, sexual education, contraception, abortion, because I think this is the very basis of a happy life, to be able to control fertility. And in the 87, 88, we were confronted with reports that this new virus and this new disease was breaking out of the formerly so-called risk groups of gay people and hemophiliacs, and was now spreading among the heterosexual population. And I found that highly unlikely and in contradiction to everything I had learned in medicine, because the mode of transmission is predetermined and doesn't change easily. And especially to say, well, now HIV broke out of the risk group because the people inside the risk groups are almost all infected. Suggests that the virus has some knowledge about how many people are infected and realizes and thinks and says, well, now I'm going to change my mode of transmission. This is like us being stuck in a car jam, in a traffic jam, and deciding suddenly, well, now we can just fly because we can't move forward with our car. It doesn't make sense. And that's when I started to ask critical questions, and I didn't get satisfying answers.
They cling to that, you know, and they think if you suggest that it's their activity, the way they live their life, that you're a homophobe or something, you're some kind of an idiot. There's something wrong with you. There's some of them that aren't that stupid, but you know, there's a lot of them that are religiously associated with the notion. They believe in the notion that it is an infectious thing that will eventually sweep across the planet and kill everybody. PCR came along right about the same time that HIV did, and it was at CETUS that people started looking with PCR for HIV. That was the only way to see it, except for culture, which was a long, protracted procedure, which a lot of times didn't turn up the results there weren't very good either.
Can be contaminated.
Oh, the cultures, the whole method, that cell biology is a bunch of magic half the time. And those culture, you know, the people that say they can do quantitative estimations of HIV from cultures are just, they're fooling themselves. The number of cases reported went up epidemically, you know, exponentially, because the number of tests that was done went up exponentially. How many doctors knew about HIV in 1983? 2. How many knew about it in 1985? Say 500. How many knew about it in 1986? 40,000. So that's where the curve came from. How much money did we make off of HIV this year? And they could have plotted that, and it would have looked the same. You know, and they could have said it's an epidemic because we're making more and more money off of it every year. If it's just caused by needles, or it's just caused by homosexual activities, you're not going to really get a long, sustained public outcry against it, and nobody's going to want to spend $6 billion a year. They're going to say, well, we really didn't like those people anyhow. Great. I can't think of a better solution to the homosexual problem than a disease that'll kill them all. I mean, there would be congressmen that would talk about that quietly, not on television. So the CDC had to say, we can't say that. We've got to say it's got to be heterosexually transmitted. There's no proof that it's transmitted at all at that point. So why not just say, oh, it's heterosexually transmitted too? Because that made it a plague, and the CDC needed one. The CDC hadn't had a good plague since polio. Their funding was probably going to be cut back if they didn't come up with one. The guy that was the head of the CDC, in fact, wrote memos that have been obtained, you know, where he describes this as hot stuff. You know, those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. The scientists are, like you say, they are considered the final arbiters of what's good for the planet or what's bad for the planet. And they hadn't got the slightest idea. Instead of wearing white robes, they wear white lab coats, you know. Instead of bringing you the word of God, they bring you the word of the EPA or whatever. And they don't have to understand what it is that they're making you do, in fact. And people, you know, I think they fall naturally into it because there is a need in humanity for something like a religion, something that makes you feel a part of some larger kind of group, something that you think, in spite of your wormy little life, makes you a part of something good, something big. When beliefs get tangled up with facts, matters of fact become matters of religious kind of significance, where if somebody gets mad at you for asking him a question in a scientific meeting, or says, we're never going to have Kary Mullis at the European Union of whatever kind of scientists, so they put it in Nature, because he came in there and had the audacity to tell people that it might not be that bad to have sex, that AIDS might not be something you get from sex, that I don't see any evidence for it, is all I said. I don't see any evidence for it. What? You can't tell young people that.
Today there are many scientists and physicians working within the conventional institutions who have similar viewpoints to those of the dissidents. Well, why don't they come out? Why don't they speak their minds? Is it possible that they take a look at what has happened when you do question the HIV equals AIDS equals death hypothesis? They've been suppressed. Dr. Peter Duesberg, noted scientist, was the main person in the line of fire.
Peter is a very scholarly person in addition to being brilliant too. He's very careful. He doesn't say anything that he can't support. And also one of the most brilliant people surely the most brilliant virologist.
Peter Duesberg at the University of California, Berkeley campus is seen as someone who is now dangerous. His funding has been cut off. Graduate students are encouraged not to take his courses, and I think his administrative duties have included being in charge of the department picnic.
My funding, for example, from the National Institute of Health will not be renewed as of this year, and I may be out of business then. Also, my colleagues have essentially excommunicated me. I'm not invited to meetings, or hardly ever to meetings anymore, not ever to one on AIDS. I'm not allowed to publish in the same journals anymore as I used to. Even as a member of the National Academy, I cannot publish in the National Academy my views that drugs may be the cause of AIDS. And I have plenty of evidence to support it, to document my claim, which might be very relevant to the health of millions of Americans and people on this planet. Yet I'm censored because I'm essentially considered to be an outcast or an odd man or somebody who has controversial views.
He was a really well thought of guy too because of his ideas. The whole field, I mean in cancer, he's the guy that led him into the whole oncogene thing, you know. Big research bonanza. Anybody who could order a little kit from some company and hire a couple of technicians could be a cancer researcher because of things that Peter opened up. And then Peter said, no, I don't think that's actually the cause of cancer. And that made those guys a little bit angry. And then he comes along and does the same thing for AIDS. He said, you know, I think we're on the wrong track here. You know, it's just like in political scandals. Follow the money trail. Figure out who's getting paid for this. Who's getting the money for those Western blots. There's your person who's going to always come down on the side of, yeah, you got a confirmatory Western blots, they call it. They don't even do them in England anymore.
No,
but
not since 1992.
It's totally, and ask a doctor how it works. The doctor who prescribes it says, got to have a Western blot to confirm this ELISA positive thing. How does that work, doctor? Sir, what are they now measuring about me that's different from what they measured with the ELISA test? He wouldn't know. He's not got any idea. I'll bet you there's scarcely 50 physicians in this country that know what a Western blot really is. They know when to order it, and they know they get a kickback on it probably.
AZT is an antiretroviral drug that became the first drug approved for the treatment of AIDS and HIV infection in 1987. It was originally intended to treat cancer, but it failed to show efficacy and had unacceptably high side effect profiles. However, the unavailability at that time for alternatives to treat AIDS affected the risk-benefit ratio greatly.
Antiviral drugs are chemotherapies. They're all based on chemotherapies that have been developed 30 years ago, long before AIDS was known, to kill human cells. Chemotherapy is restricted to a few months in the hope the cancer dies before you die.
If you started taking any other chemotherapeutic agent for the rest of your life, it would be that agent probably that killed you. You know, when you give chemotherapy to somebody with cancer, you give them a round of it for maybe 14 days or a few days. Hopefully you're not going to kill the patient, you're going to kill the cancer. The patient's going to survive. But you don't keep giving it to him until he dies, because he certainly will. The way to get rid of AIDS is to stop funding it. Just stop everything that's called AIDS research. Somebody tries to get a grant for AIDS research, say, we don't do it anymore. We don't have AIDS. If you want to study pneumocystis carinii, we'll maybe look at your paper and see if you've got, you know, something to say about that. You want to study any one of those diseases by itself, try to cure it, we'll talk about that. The thing that I learned, like back in 1968 when I first published a paper by myself in Nature in a field that I had no expertise in at all, there are no old wise men up there at the top of science. Which I really did until '68. I would have thought You know, if you try to publish a dumb paper in a journal like Nature, it won't get published. If you try to publish a good paper in there, like I later tried to publish PCR, the invention of PCR, in the same journal, and they didn't take it. So it's up there. There isn't an up there there. There's no place up on the Academy of Science is just a bunch of idiots, just like everybody else. You know, the editors of journals, austere journals even, they're just busy with their little lives and stuff. There are no old wise men up on the top making sure that we don't do something really dumb.
Es para nosotros un honor tenerlo en nuestro programa.
Y lo he dicho muy a menudo en estos últimos años, es que no hay evidencias exactas, científicas, que vinculen el HIV con el SIDA. Pero esto no es religión, ¿comprende? Tiene que ver con empresas farmacéuticas, ministerios, drogas altamente tóxicas, miles de personas, muchos que están muriendo. Es un tema científico. Tiene que tener una base científica. Es una cuestión muy sencilla, es algo fácil de preguntar. ¿Quién es responsable de la información sobre la que estamos trabajando? Por ejemplo, si el HIV causa SIDA. No hay un lugar donde usted pueda verificar por qué tiene que creerlo, por qué tiene que seguirlo. ¿Por qué va a actuar de esa manera? Pregúntele a alguien que les haya mostrado que el HIV causa el SIDA. ¿Y qué va a encontrar? No saben. Pregúntele más. ¿Qué hizo que ellos pensaran que el HIV causaba el SIDA y por qué? Van a evadir esa pregunta y le puede preguntar a cualquiera en el establishment del SIDA. Hay mucha gente que está viviendo hace 10 años sobre este tema. Pregúnteles a cualquiera. ¿Por qué? Cuando decidió por sí mismo que el HIV causa SIDA y es un pozo sin fondo. Así no trabaja la ciencia. Todo ese dinero se está donando para estudiar el HIV, porque todos en el mundo creen que el HIV causa SIDA. Mi pregunta es, ¿por qué lo creen?
Estas revelaciones que usted dice, no hay ningún elemento científico que relacione el HIV con el SIDA.
En los HIV positivos quiere decir que tiene HIV en su sangre. No es en realidad en sí una enfermedad y no debería ser tratado con drogas peligrosas, con aminoácidos. En mi opinión y en la opinión de otros, han causado muchos problemas atribuidos al SIDA. Esas personas que tienen HIV y también tienen los síntomas de SIDA, también hay algunas micosis, cándida, cosas como esas. Esas personas probablemente tengan SIDA, pero en lo que a mí respecta, tomar una droga peligrosa como AZT, que es para eliminar a un organismo que quizás no sirva para este caso, es tonto. El SIDA puede ser causado por un organismo infeccioso. Simplemente porque no está causado por el HIV no quiere decir que no esté causado por otros organismos infecciosos, ¿comprende? Algunas de las precauciones que han tomado las personas contra el HIV pueden en realidad ser efectivas contra las causas reales del SIDA. En cambio, mi opinión particular es que no es una enfermedad infecciosa en el sentido de una enfermedad como la gripe o la neumonía. Hay otros agentes infecciosos y sabemos que una vez que usted los adquiere la enfermedad. El SIDA es una enfermedad infecciosa, sí lo es, que es muy especial. No se disemina, se decía que no se diseminaba más allá de los grupos homosexuales metropolitanos. este tema que después se llamó SIDA y que se dijo que era causado por un organismo, el HIV. Nunca se mostró, nunca se comprobó.
Este marcador indirecto es un artefacto tecnológico sofisticado que presenta como una cantidad que da la máquina sofisticada como número de ejemplares de VIH por mililitro de sangre. En realidad, incluso considerando que el VIH existiese, cosa que, repito, no hay ninguna prueba de ello, este número para nada significaría el número de copias de VIH por mililitro de sangre. Por un lado, el propio inventor de esta máquina, el doctor Kary Mullis, esta técnica se llama PCR, le concedieron el premio Nobel el año 93 por haber inventado esta máquina. El propio doctor Mullis explica que su técnica no es cuantitativa, es cualitativa, no es cuantitativa. Con esto indica claramente que no puede dar medida alguna que tenga sentido real. Hasta el 95, oficialmente, el VIH modelo Gallo-Montañer, que se aplica desde el 84, el VIH es dificilísimo de encontrar oficialmente. En personas terminales de SIDA que morían a las pocas semanas, días, víctimas del VIH, no encontraban el VIH. Y en cambio, de repente, aparecen cantidades enormes por todas partes. Antes no se encontraba, ahora se encuentra por todas partes.
Kary Mullis, bioquímico, inventor de la PCR, la reacción en cadena polimerasa, con la cual se hacen los test de carga viral desde mediados de los 90. Kary Mullis desde siempre dijo que su técnica no servía para contar virus, que es para lo que se utiliza. Este hombre no ha hecho más que llevarse porrazos por haber dicho eso. Y los otros son millonarios. Que es algo que siempre hay que plantearse, que ganan unos y que ganan otros. En esto y en cualquier cuestión. Kary Mullis, en el prefacio a un libro de Peter Duesberg, cuenta cómo se dio cuenta. Porque como, igual que los que habéis levantado la mano, igual que yo antes del 92, él creía que el virus del SIDA causaba el SIDA. Pero le encargaron un trabajo. Le encargaron un trabajo y él empezó a buscar dónde están los documentos originales, y esos documentos originales que probaban que el SIDA era causado por un virus no existían. Hablando incluso como premio Nobel cara a cara con el señor Montañer, con Gallo, con las máximas autoridades. Concluye, no hemos podido encontrar ninguna buena razón por la cual la mayoría de la gente sobre la Tierra cree que el SIDA es una enfermedad causada por un virus llamado VIH. Simplemente, no hay evidencia científica alguna que demuestre que esto es cierto. Sabemos que errar es humano, pero la hipótesis VIH-SIDA es un error diabólico.
If you go to authority, and you don't always get the right answers. See, but I knew you go into the lab and you try to make it work yourself, and then you're the authority, and you can say, I know it works because right there in that tube is where it happened, and here on this gel there's a little band there that I know that's DNA, and that's the DNA I wanted to amplify, so there. So it does work. You know, that's how you do science. And then you say, well, what can make it work better? And then you figure out better and better ways to do it. But you always work from like facts that you have made available to you by doing experiments, things that you could do on a stage. And those tricky shit behind the thing, I mean, it's all, you got to be very honest with what you're doing if it really is going to work. I mean, you can't make up results and then do another experiment based on that one. So you have to be honest. And I'm basically honest. I have a fairly bad memory, and dishonesty would always get me in trouble. So I've just sort of been naturally honest and naturally inquisitive, and that sort of leads to that kind of science. Okay, I want to tell you, all scientists aren't like that, you know, and there is a lot. There's a lot been going on since Isaac Newton and all that stuff happened. One of the things happened right around World War II, in that same time period before and surely as hell afterwards. Government realized that scientists aren't little strange dudes that, you know, hide in ivory towers and do ridiculous things with test tubes. Scientists, you know, made World War II, as we know it, quite possible. I mean, they made faster things. They made bigger guns to shoot them down with. You know, they made drugs to give the pilots if they were broken up in the process. They made all kinds of, I mean, they finally one giant bomb to end the whole thing, right? And everybody stepped back a little and said, you know, we ought to invest in this shit. Because whoever has got the most of these people working in the best places is going to have a dominant position, at least in the military, and probably in all kinds of economic ways. And they got involved in it, and the scientific industrial establishment was born. And out of that came a lot of scientists who were in there for the money, you know, because it was suddenly available. And they weren't the curious little boys that liked to put frogs up in the air. They were the same people that later went into medical school, you know, because there was money in it, you know, and later then they all got into business. I mean, there's waves of going into your high school person said, you want to be rich, you know, be a scientist, you know, not anymore. You want to be rich, you be a businessman. But a lot of people got in it for the money and the power and the travel. It's back when travel was easy. And like, those people don't think, they don't always tell you the truth. You know, there is nothing in their contract, in fact, that makes it to their advantage always to tell you the truth. So, and these are the people I'm talking about are people that like, they say they're a member of the committee called, say, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they have these big meetings where they try to figure out how are we going to continually prove that the planet is getting warmer, like the actual evidence, you know, which would be evidence for strengthening of the tropical circulation in the 1990s. It's a paper that came out in February, and most of you probably hadn't heard about it. Evidence for large decadal variability in the tropical mean radiative energy budget. Excuse me. Those papers were published by NASA and some scientists at Columbia and Veliki and a whole bunch of people, Princeton. And those two papers came out in Science magazine February the 1st. And the conclusion in both of these papers, and then also the Science editor's like description of these papers for, you know, the quickie, is that our theories about global warming are completely wrong. And there's a lot of things like global warming and ozone hole and, you know, a whole bunch of scientific public issues that if you're interested in them, you have to get down to the details and read the papers called Large Decadal Variability in the Tropics. You have to figure out what all those words mean. And if you just listen to the guys who were hyping those issues and making a lot of money out of it, you'll be misinformed and you'll be worrying about the wrong things. Remember the 10 things that are going to get you. The one of them, and the asteroids is the one I really agree with there. I mean, you got to watch out for asteroids. Okay, thank you for having me here. I just had a natural feeling for science and setting up experiments. I thought that's the way everybody had always thought. I thought anybody with any brains will do it that way. At any rate, when I was a boy, like for instance, I got this little book from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. This is about the time that George Dyson's dad was starting to blow nuclear and thinking about blowing up nuclear rockets and stuff. I was thinking about making my own little rockets, and I knew that little frogs had aspirations of space travel just like people. And I was looking for a propulsion system that would like make a rocket like maybe about 4 feet high go up a couple of miles. And I mean, that was my sort of goal. I wanted it to go out of sight, and then I wanted this little parachute to come back with the frog in it. And I got this book from Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where there was a missile base. They sent it out for amateur rocketeers. And it said in there, do not ever heat a mixture of potassium perchlorate and sugar. And, you know, that's what you call a lead, sort of. And you say, well, let's see if I could get a hold of some potassium chlorate and sugar, perchlorate and sugar, and heat it. It'd be interesting to see what it is they don't want me to do. What is it going to, how is it going to work?